office with Dylan Clapmeyer. And I know others will be coming when they can. If not, we have got, and I'll put this up on your desk. This is some ideas and information of what we are looking at. And this will go up on everybody's desk that has a school election, whether it's about the trustees, any kind of allowances or limitations regarding school boards and trustees elections. So that's it. Let me do a quick introduction. Of course, State Superintendent, and I'm very honored that we also have.
Hi, Sheri Scurr.
Yeah. And Sheri, give a little bit about who you are.
Sure, you bet. Legislative Services Division retiree. I worked 30 years with Legislative Services Division and primarily in the State Administration and Veterans Affairs Interim Committee and drafting legislation related to elections. So I've been in this area for a while and I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you. Anna, thank you for taking that. If you would also put up on the screen our discussion points, okay? That would be great so that we can share the screen with what we have. It's my understanding there were how many, 28 that have something to do with elections, school elections specifically. That's almost 1/5 of the body.
Well, yes, and there's actually many more bill drafts out there than those that relate to elections.
Mm-hmm.
But those were the ones that had general revision ideas and that we thought we would have interested legislators for.
So we're going to go ahead and share the screen with some options and ideas. And I know time is very precious. So I'd like to make sure that, we get the crux of this as quick and as soon as we possibly can, because I'm sure there will be other discussion points as we move through this. So I know this is small print, but if you could enlarge it, Anna, just a little bit, that's great. Thank you. That'll be very helpful. So I also have Nicole Thuat here, and Nicole has worked in our office for multiple years and sessions regarding school elections. And she has been very, very supportive as that bridge between the agency as well as with county and clerk. And Nicole, I thank you. So you're part of this expertise group that we are triangulating here at the Office of Public Instruction. Dylan Clapmeyer is also on, and then we have Senator Manzella. I'm sure others will join us. So with this, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Certainly. And Senator Manzella, it's good to see you. It's interesting. I have a folder today that has my horsemanship.
Oh, I love that, Sheri.
I still totally am awed by the work you do and have done with the horses.
Thank you.
Okay, so the very first question is, and this is a question that has come up in legislative meetings for many sessions and many interims, and it's about combining school elections with either the primary or the general. So in terms of a bill draft and what a bill drafter would need to look for is we do need the threshold decision. Would it be the primary or would it be the general that you want to combine the elections? And then the other topic of discussion that's come up is just changing the trustee election date. But then the question is, well, that leaves the school levy election on the regular day in May. And if you separate them, then you're going to have an effect on voter turnout for the levy election as well. So the question then is that if you keep them together and you move both, then we have the effect on the school budgeting timelines. So that number one question is the key. And in the bill drafts that I've worked on in the past, sometimes it's been the primary, sometimes it's been the general, and we've ended up getting halfway through the bill draft before we have to before the weight of the technical issues becomes too great. So I would direct you, there was a survey done that MACO did, and I don't know if that summary got put into the packet, but I can go very briefly over. Yes, it did. I'll go very briefly over. The counties were surveyed and asked if we had to change between a primary or general election, which one would you prefer? Oh, thank you. So 31 counties responded. 11 said they prefer the general, 12 said they prefer the primary, 7 said neither, and they didn't offer a preference, and 1 said they didn't indicate. So it's pretty evenly split. But I will tell you that when I looked at the comments about primary or general, many of the comments about the primary were, you're dealing with party ballots, and the idea that you would have splits for district and nonpartisan trustees was a concern about doing at the primary election. And so many of the comments actually led me to think, oh, well, the general is actually, county superintendents are already elected at the general election. So that's where some of those comments went. If the school election were to be combined with the primary or general, which, oh, I already said that. Okay, let's go back to the threshold questions now. Thank you. So under number 2, okay, so I don't know if we want to have any discussion, Elsie, at all on primary or general at this point, or if you want me to just keep going through.
I
the
think we
issues.
keep going.
Okay. The number 2 threshold question is, under current law, with few exceptions, the special purpose district elections are held on the same day as the school elections. Now, SAVA did do a very intensive study about combining school elections in the 2013-14 legislative interim, and they presented a bill in 2015 that passed that consolidated the election provisions related to special purpose district. And the reason for that is when we got into the study of the school district elections, it became very difficult to amend statutes that were sometimes ambiguous and sometimes actually in conflict. So the committee set aside looking at the school election question and said, let's clean up the special purpose district. And in the interest of consolidating elections, let's consolidate them on the school election day. So the school election day is the consolidated day for all the special purpose district elections, and counties are required to run those special purpose district elections with some with some exceptions, because there's a lot of different types of districts out there. So the next threshold question is, if you're going to move the school election, are you also then going to move the special purpose district elections to either the primary or the general? And this is where the issue of boundaries comes up, because now not only do you have the complexity of all the different high school, elementary, and combined school district elections, but you also have all of those special purpose district elections with all the other boundaries.
So when it comes to boundaries, that's the ballot faces.
Correct.
That would have to be changed via the county or via Secretary of State, depending on where it lands.
Changing district boundaries is incredibly difficult.
Definitely.
The way that it works now is when a special purpose district is being created, it's the governing body of that district that sets the boundaries.
Yep.
And then those boundaries are put into a legal description, and then there's a database at the state library, and then the state library helps with the Secretary of State to get those into. And the accuracy of those boundaries is something we're going to discuss when we talk about the potential incremental changes.
Okay.
But this is why you end up with ballot faces of 50 or more different ways that a voter would have to, an election administrator would have to figure out which voter got which ballot for what districts. And in some cases, especially with these special purpose districts, they don't even have to live in their residence. Is not, it's the property.
So the threshold question on number 2 then is, do we keep those special districts where they're at in May, if indeed it is moved to a different date? Or do we keep them where they're at and we just focus in on the school trustees elections? That would be my preference, because we've already had since 13 a discussion with everybody on those special districts. That's fine. I don't know if it was contingent on the school elections. It was just, that was a school election date.
Right. It was the school election date.
Okay.
They didn't want to put it with a primary or general. Actually, we changed some of those from being primary or general just to simplify things.
Okay.
Because, and number one, they also felt that it was easier to administer because we were requiring counties to run these elections, and they said, oh my gosh, don't do that in the primary or general. School election day would be a great day.
Okay.
So because we can do these by mail. See, this is the other thing. When you do school districts and you do special districts, when you do them by mail, it's a simpler process.
Exactly. Senator.
Thank you. Madam Superintendent. Sheri, may I ask you a question to give me an example, if you would please, of what's included in special districts? I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm tending to agree with Elsie, but I need to have a better understanding of what's all involved. What falls under special districts?
Yes, that's a very great question. And there's different types of special districts, but it's the water and sewer districts, it's the hospital districts, it's the fire districts, irrigation districts, conservation districts,
Mosquito districts.
cemetery districts, mosquito districts, weed districts. There are probably, I don't know, sometimes 70 or 80 different types of districts, special improvement districts.
Can we make anything more complicated?
That's right. And so it's interesting because when we get into statutory changes, then we're in the local government laws, and there are, you'll see that I use the term special purpose district as a defined term because there are other types of districts in Title VII that are just special districts, and it has to do with whether they're able to tax, whether they're able to collect money for their district, the police district, the fire district, the weed district. And some special districts are not, don't have fee structures. So there's a lot of complexity with these elections.
So what my preference would be at this point is to make a split and have those special purpose district elections be separated from the school election. And I don't know, Senator or anyone else, and Nicole, please jump in. You know, what would the sticky issue of that be?
Well, you know, if you kept it in May with the special purpose districts, and you have the counties run those, that's fine. The question is, if your policy goal is turnout and voter participation in these elections, does that compromise your goal? And that's a question to ask with election administrators and with your local officials, because it may be that it doesn't, that, you know, people that live in these districts have a vested interest in how they're done, and they're going to focus on that in May, and it's not going to be a confusion with the primary or the general. So
the other threshold policy decision that, you know, and Senator, you spoke about this as well as the complication of it. You know, if the special purpose districts are already at the county level, and I know you have an intent to move the school elections to the county, not on a different date, but just to have that possibly move in that simplest way, that it is the county that will do the school board elections. And that might be part of that incremental approach, rather than moving it all the way to a general where you might have greater turnout. But that's one of the things that I think, Sheri, you keyed into me specifically in your thinking, that we do an incremental look at this. And so that we do harm, but that we bring everybody along. You know, that train runs slower, but to get to that station, but in more of an incremental.
you know, and Superintendent, that is a really good point, because with regard to these special district elections and the school elections, the counties that do run these elections primarily run them by mail.
By mail.
So doing school elections as a polling place election is a whole new ballgame for a lot of them, which would have to be polling place elections in a primary or general. So one of the incremental changes that we'll talk about is how to bring some expertise and experience into running polling place elections for this on the school election day. So that leads us to the third threshold questions, is about the counties and requiring counties to run these elections. So current law right now, a school district can request that the election be run by the county. And like I said, many of the counties will agree to that. A lot of them don't agree to that, but those that do agree to that agree to it with the caveat that they're run by mail.
Okay. And Nicole, this is the world that you've been working in. And I believe the data that we also have is how many current counties do, through the choice of the school district, do perform the mail ballot.
Well, yes. So if Anna, if you could go back to the survey results. What I need to say, though, is that when Mako helped us do this survey, they did not ask who runs it by mail. But you'll notice if you scroll down to the tables, Yep, table 2. These are the ones that administer one or some school elections. And then scroll down even more to table 3. Okay, county declined all requests. These are the counties that administer no elections. There were a lot of ones that said, like in Daniels, no amount of money made me want to administer school elections.
Quote.
Quote.
Snap.
And go down, and then scroll down one more page. And so county declined all the requests. There was one comment here about the school district didn't even request because they don't, oh yeah, Teton County schools don't want mail ballot elections. They wanted their polling place election. And so they didn't even ask the county because the county said, no, we won't do it unless it's a mail ballot. But I don't have data for you on how many actually do it by mail. But I can sense from the comments, I'm sensing from the comments that if you go down the road, and we'll go back to the threshold question number 3 slide, that if you do a legislation that requires counties to run the school elections, there's resistance out there to even doing it unless the schools agree to do it by school elections. So the threshold policy question for you is, all right, if we want the counties to do it, number 1, you're taking away an option. Are you good with that? And number 2, are you going to allow them to do it by mail and still allow a mail ballot election?
So it's a choice that, do you still offer choice in proceeding with the bill? Or do you say as a mandate that there is no choice, or choice within how it's delivered via mail or via not mail?
Or via not mail. And this leads to the other incremental change, because again, polling place election and election judges, it's a whole different, it's a lot of different pieces that you don't have when it's a mail ballot election. So under number 3, you'll see there needs to be careful consideration. If you go this route, one of the things exactly, careful consideration of the statutory powers and duties of trustees and counties. So what I'm learning, what I know as a bill drafter, and when we deal with our legal review of bill drafts, and Rob is your expert on this too, there are statutory assumptions that are made in construction that is made, and that construction in our current laws is the option, and the option of the mail is typically thought of as an exception.
Oh.
So
interesting.
Polling places are assumed in the statute. So when we start requiring counties to conduct all school elections, and then we want to keep the piece of a mail ballot election, there are statutory assumptions and themes that even if you're not moving a timeline or a particular number, you have to change the entire construction of the statute. So when we get into this area, I begin to wonder as a technician on this, whether it makes sense to actually amend the statutes or to repeal and start fresh.
Okay, and that's big. And that word repeal is big. And that gets into the potential incremental changes that we're looking at to bona fide action, so we don't do unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let's jump down to the potential incremental. Number 4 we'll come back to, but the potential incremental changes. So in the survey comments that we saw, the idea of a task force to identify changes and develop legislation for 2005, one of the themes that came out was, please don't make this big change before the presidential election. We're doing the redistricting right now. We're learning a whole new voter information system. There's a lot of technical moving parts for new election administrators. So at least do a phased-in approach and maybe have a task force to look at. So that incremental change is an option, a bill draft that I've prepared. It's in here as a starting point for discussion. It would require an appropriation, and this task force would be of technicians, not the SAVA interim committee. A bill for study has failed in that regard because of all the different issues that SAVA does, and also because a task force is made up of the experts, and they could be directed to actually develop legislation and work through the calendar changes that would have to be made.
So if I'm understanding, then number one would not be an interim committee. They could report to an interim committee. They could have, the opportunity to create the draft, to do all that other part. And some OTO money would go toward the creation of the task force, which when I did the task force for school finance in 15 for the decennial study, it was $65,000 was what was given for a task force. And so we're not talking a tremendous a lot. It could go upward depending on what indeed you give the bill to have to develop the changes. And then you could also write into this bill, not just the whereases of why this is needed, but also at the very end of this to be able to what you're going to get as an outcome. The other part is, I don't believe a task force is a study bill. This is a piece of legislation. So you don't have to be voted on in the very end of the session that you have a study bill, because it's not going to an interim committee.
Correct.
So this is a standalone bill as itself. Okay, number two.
Correct. Well, and the other thing about the task force is that you would have the county election administrators, the school election administrators, the Secretary of State's office, the OPI, all represented in work, in a work that's focused on a particular task and outcome. So number two, the incentives. So we talked about having options and we talked about polling place elections. So the incentive program would simply be kind of like a pilot. It would keep your May election date, and it would say to the counties and the schools to gain experience about running school elections as polling place elections. If you buy into this incentive, and it's an optional thing, then you have one-time only money available to you to fund the election. It's going to fund a polling place situation. So you're going to deal with the election judges and how it's all going to be. The schools wouldn't have to pay for the election. So that's an incentive for the schools. And you keep it on the May dates, but then we develop some experience working between the counties and the schools. And we see what is that experience for the voters as well.
Exactly. So that, Senator, is pretty much a precursor to having it move completely in more of a gentle fashion, more of a carrot than a stick to the county. And as we have gone through the data, we would know a little bit more on what that might mean when we write the fiscal note to that. But you have a question.
I do. I have to excuse myself from the meeting. I've got another engagement at 11:30. So, but I love how you've approached this, Elsie and Sheri, and you are recording it. So if you'll make the link available to me, I will definitely finish watching it. And I'm sorry I have to leave.
I understand that you have another commitment. We are going to go ahead and continue. And then all of the information that we are discussing here will be sent to you virtually as well. There will be a red folder that's got our A+ logo on it. You'll see that on your Senate desk.
Wonderful.
If I can get it up to the pages, it'll be there before you see it at your 1 o'clock.
And Senator, I wanted to put a fine point on this, though. The drafts that are in this packet are simply me taking some shots, and I haven't run it past all the stakeholders, and so they are very preliminary and subject to any kind of changes.
Exactly. Thank you for that caveat.
Appreciate your effort.
Blessings.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we've talked about 1 and 2. And Dylan, I know you're on. Do you understand that we might be asking for some OTO money? Not very much for the first one with the task force. Number 2, I don't know yet what that would mean. I don't know what the cost of making sure that the schools understand that this is an incentive for them as much as an incentive for the counties in order to do this. And it would be OTO.
It would now. And Dylan, when you look at that bill draft, and I would like to rope in some of the fiscal analysts in this as well, the legislative fiscal analysts, but the way that I conceived of this was based on a grant type of idea where you would have a certain pot of money. Each county could not request more than a maximum amount, and that a maximum amount would be based on the number of registered electors in their county. And then they can request, and then whatever's available to them would be not paid as a reimbursement, because a lot of grant programs are reimbursements, but they incur costs right up front. So they would be able to spend the money as they go, and then they would have to revert what they don't spend.
Exactly. And again, this in my mind is part of my philosophy is government working with rather than doing to. Granted, if the task force does come out that we want to make this change or whatever changes there are, it would be up to the next legislative session to do that. This one would begin immediately after. Now, would it incur the next presidential election? Yes, we could write into it though, that it may not start until the 2024 school board election or.
Right, it was just,
2024.
in the way it's written now,
Yeah.
it's just a one-year
Yeah,
program.
1 year
It
program.
was just one fiscal year.
And we would gain data from it to be, so it'd be similar to the task force. Now, we could put both of them together. That's one of the other options. There could be a task force, concurrent with an incentive to make sure that we have got data flowing from one to another so that it's contiguous here at this. Number 3.
Absolutely. Okay, so the boundary accuracy project. So we talked about the school districts and the special districts, and the boundary issue is very important for election administration to know who lives where and who's eligible to vote where. And of course, with the special districts, I included them in here, even though initially we discussed only the school district project. It made sense to me that if you're gonna allocate money and having discussions with local governments, a good, effective, efficient thing would be to look at the special districts as well. But you don't have to. You could take that part out. It's easier to take it out than it was just to put it in so that you could see what it would be like. But essentially what this would be is the state library working in conjunction, which they already do, but in a very concentrated way with the local governments to take a look at their legal boundaries, digitize them in the GIS system, and then be able to upload that information with the Secretary of State's office for election administrators to use. So I just had a discussion this morning with the GIS coordinator at the state library, and we're going to meet tomorrow. So my bill draft actually, it seems to be pretty on target, but we might have some changes to make there.
And that's all about timing. Again, we could have this all as a single title. We could put 1, 2, and 3 pretty much combined together. But I believe that, and there could be coordinating language, there could be all kinds of things if one doesn't, one does, or however, or a separation of anything.
Well, and actually they're pretty clean right now as separate bills.
Right, yeah.
And we have whereases in those that, and we could put a coordination instruction as well that that allows some coordination if all 3 passed. But right now they do have their own. They can be standalone.
And I like that idea for myself. I mean, I like that idea. Now, I would go to the chair and say, "Can I put them all together on the same day?"
Oh,
so that,
yeah,
so that we've got
as
a flow of thought all together.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4.
And number 4 is a cleanup bill for technical things. Now, there are some things in current statutes with school elections and timelines, especially regarding to candidate filing deadlines and withdrawal deadlines and ballot certification that election administrators, and Nicole can speak to this a little better than I can. No funding would be required in this. It's a technical cleanup of school elections. The only thing is the timeline changes being requested would not hold if you actually moved the school elections to the primary or general. So this would be a temporary fix for the next cycle, but it's something I think would be appreciated by the election administrators. And there are some other things to add to the draft that's there, but the current draft that's there has got some of the ideas that have come up. And
so any questions at all, Nicole, Dylan, anyone?
Sure. I appreciate you inviting me to this. This is helpful, and all the information you've pulled together. I guess some of my questions are just higher level about this process. I think we're all in agreement. We're trying to, increase voter participation, kind of reduce voter fatigue by reducing the number of elections. have we thought about moving those special elections to coincide, those special district elections to coincide with municipal elections? And have we, I guess, has that been considered for school elections as well? If we're getting feedback from the counties that during the general election, they're overwhelmed and that there's other concerns with a primary election, we thought about just kicking all of this to municipal elections.
Good thought. I hadn't thought.
Well, and actually, Dylan, that's a good question, but I'm not exactly sure if municipal elections, how they work.
Okay, so we can do a little digging on that.
Or I should say local, not municipal, but local, you know, in off years when you vote for your county commissioners, your city councilors, your sheriff, all that stuff.
It's still a general election. Yeah.
It would still be on November.
I mean, it's still a November election. There's a September.
There's cutoff dates.
There's cutoff dates
that are different.
that are different. Yeah, it's a different.
Is that
ball
correct?
game.
Is that correct, Nicole?
Yes, and the problem with the primary election is that the primary is really in two different dates in odd and even years. Because in the even years, it's a presidential primary, which is held in June. And in odd years, it's a municipal primary, which I believe is held in either August or September. So if we're looking for a consistent date every year, that's why we were looking at general election rather than primaries, because, you know, to keep it at the same time every year so it doesn't change.
Right. If you do it in the general, then you can do a general in the municipal in the off years, because that's the general for the municipal. But the primary is different, just like Nicole said.
Sure.
But good
I just
thought.
wonder if, I just wonder if the county election officials just might be less stressed during an off year, I guess.
I appreciate that. I very much appreciate
Yes,
the burden.
well, and that is part of that threshold question. If you change, school elections are annual. So you know,
Okay.
you would still have it. It wouldn't be, it's not that you're doing odd and even, it's that you're doing an annual election for the schools.
And I have visited with Lance Melton, who leads up the trustees for our state and their association, because one of the dominoes might be moving the trustees election to 2 rather than to an annual. And that means then that, and there's been discussion of term limits, there's been a whole other, you know, part of this. So that might be where that move happens, to notice exactly what, not to take away the authority of the trustee, but to look within the framework of who they are. To be able to have this. I believe the key parts is uniformity and more voter turnout.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's the follow-on policy discussion, because if you take the trustee election and you combine that into the general at 2 years, you're going to get more turnout, of course, for the trustees. But what does that do to your annual general fund levy election?
Exactly.
Which is where I think you're going to be really concerned about the funding.
Because you, again, the authority that happens in law right now, there's a lot of contiguous with the funding aspect of
And well,
it.
and you want the voter turnout for that.
Right. So we've got Sheri here, we've got Nicole, and what I want to offer then is that when this information goes out to you digitally as well as on legislative desks, and Dylan will, of course, drop one off at you and send it digitally to you as well.
Thanks.
We want to make sure we do the right thing at the right time. I believe it's bigger than what, you know, I initially thought, as everyone. I believe the incremental approaches are extremely thought out, and I very much appreciate that. We are going to be convening again and seeing a little bit more personal of the combining those that are saying, yes, we want it combined, those that want it in the primary, the general, those that would like to see more information before they make a determination. As I believe there are more than 28 that have some sort of bite at this apple at this point.
Well, and then I understand that there's going to be a special committee on elections.
Yep.
So
Yep.
during the session.
So anything else you would like to add to this? This is recorded, so we'll go ahead and make sure that everyone receives this that was invited. Nicole.
So there's one other thing that I'm really surprised did not come up with the counties. is that one of the things that's unique about school elections is the fact that school districts are in multiple counties, whereas precincts and special districts are all contained within a single county. So we have 37 school districts that are located in 2 counties and 9 that are located in 3 counties. So that requires a level of coordination at the county level that's not required for any other type of election that they're running. So I think that's something that has to be considered as well when we're talking about any of these bills, is how to approach that coordination.
I really appreciate the word coordination, because I also want to give the word authority out there with as much as it's given by statute in locally, in the governance of counties within our state.
Wow. And I just thought, and actually that's been in the back of my mind. I'm so glad Nicole just brought it completely forward, because when we're looking at that boundaries accuracy project, the one thing is, the Secretary of State and the county election administrators keep precincts boundaries, and they can tell voters which polling place to go to for their precinct. And if we're dealing with polling place elections for schools, where do
Where
they
would that
go
be?
to get their ballot, and where is their precinct if they're ending up having to vote outside their county?
And that's one of the things that I believe the task force, in the implementation for the potential increment changes might necessarily be. We want to make sure that when we pick up this rock, that everything is looked at. I want to thank you all for your time today. We've got more that we're going to be working on this. Wanted to do this as an introduction. Everyone, please stay well. Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.